Sorry I'm late, I just don't give a fuck!
Have you ever watched greatness crumble like crackers? That's exactly what happened to one of the most explosive fighters the world has ever seen. Conor McGregor didn't just fight his way to the top, he talked his way there. McGregor mastered the art of turning confidence into currency. His trash talk wasn't just entertainment, it was calculated warfare. Every press conference became a theater where he played the villain so perfectly that millions paid just to see him lose. But here's the twist. They ended up watching him win, again and again, until the act became reality. The rise of a king. When Conor McGregor stepped into the octagon, he didn't just bring fists. He brought theater. He brought chaos. He brought a level of confidence that bordered on delusion, except for one small detail. He could back it up. This wasn't just another fighter climbing the ranks. This was a phenomenon, a walking hurricane of ambition wrapped in expensive suits and soaked in whiskey-fueled bravado. McGregor didn't just want to win fights, he wanted to rewrite the entire sports playbook. The numbers tell the story better than any highlight reel ever could. From collecting welfare checks in Dublin to generating over $600 million in pay-per-view revenue, McGregor transformed mixed martial arts from a niche combat sport into mainstream entertainment. His trash talk became legendary. His predictions became prophecy. His fights became cultural events that transcended sports entirely. But what made McGregor truly dangerous wasn't his left hand. It was his understanding of spectacle. He grasped something that most fighters never figured out. People don't just pay to watch violence. They pay to watch stories unfold. And McGregor, he was the master storyteller, crafting narratives that made every opponent look like a villain in his personal fairy tale. The featherweight division had never seen anything like him. While other fighters focused on technique and training camps, McGregor was building a brand. Every press conference became a performance. Every interview became a marketing opportunity. He wasn't just preparing for fights, he was preparing for empire. His rise through the ranks felt inevitable, almost scripted. Each victory came with increasingly bold predictions, increasingly outrageous behavior, and increasingly massive paydays. The UFC had found their golden goose, and McGregor had found his stage. It was the perfect marriage of talent and timing, skill and showmanship. The $1 million dream. Success has a way of changing people. For McGregor, it didn't just change him, it consumed him entirely. The man who once trained obsessively in dingy Dublin gyms was now more focused on building businesses than breaking bones. The transition from fighter to entrepreneur seemed natural at first. After all, every smart athlete diversifies their income streams before their prime years slip away. McGregor's business ventures started pouring in like punches in a combination. Proper No. 12 whiskey launched with the same explosive marketing that defined his fighting career. Fashion lines, fitness programs, and endorsement deals followed. The fighter who once struggled to pay rent was now reportedly worth over $200 million, at least on paper. But the most telling sign of his shifting priorities wasn't what he was building, it was what he was avoiding. Training camps became shorter, sparring sessions became optional. The obsessive dedication that had carried him to the top was being replaced by board meetings and brand partnerships. His team watched the transformation with growing concern. Coaches who had molded him into a champion found themselves competing with business managers for his attention. The gym that had once been his sanctuary was now just another appointment in an increasingly packed schedule. The whiskey business alone was consuming massive amounts of his time and energy. Marketing campaigns, distribution deals, celebrity partnerships, all of it required the same intensity that had once been reserved exclusively for fight preparation. McGregor was trying to be two people at once, and the cracks were starting to show. Fame brought another dangerous element into his life. The spotlight that had once motivated him was now blinding him to reality. Surrounded by yes men and enablers, McGregor began to believe his own mythology. The confident predictions that had once driven him to greatness were now keeping him from the hard work that greatness actually required. The Khabib nightmare. Some fights change careers, others destroy them entirely. The build-up to McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov wasn't just promoting a fight, it was lighting a fuse that would explode far beyond the confines of the octagon. McGregor, desperate to reclaim his throne after years of business distractions, went further than ever before in his psychological warfare. The press conferences became increasingly hostile, crossing lines that even McGregor's most devoted fans found uncomfortable. Personal attacks on Khabib's family, religion, and culture transformed what should have been competitive promotion into something far more sinister. McGregor was playing with forces he didn't fully understand, in a culture he didn't respect. When the cage door closed on October 6, 2018, the world witnessed something that had never happened before. Conor McGregor, the man who had never met a prediction he couldn't fulfill, was systematically dismantled by a fighter who represented everything he wasn't. Disciplined, humble, focused. Khabib didn't just win the fight, He exposed the Emperor's new clothes. Every takedown revealed how much McGregor's grappling had deteriorated during his business-focused hiatus. Every ground strike demonstrated the difference between a part-time fighter and a full-time warrior. The submission in the fourth round wasn't just a technical victory, it was a statement. But the real damage came after the final bell. Khabib's leap into the crowd to attack McGregor's teammate sparked a brawl that made international headlines for all the wrong reasons. The Nevada State Athletic Commission fined both fighters heavily, but the financial penalties were nothing compared to the reputational damage. The comeback that never came. Defeat has a way of revealing character. Some fighters use losses as motivation to return stronger. Others use them as excuses to avoid the hard truths about their declining abilities. McGregor's response to the Khabib loss fell somewhere in between, a confused mixture of defiance and denial that would define his next chapter. The immediate aftermath saw McGregor making all the right sounds. Talk of renewed dedication, longer training camps, and a hunger to reclaim his position at the top of the sport. His return fight against Donald Cerrone seemed designed to rebuild confidence against a veteran known for entertaining fights rather than championship-level wrestling. The Cerrone victory came fast and brutal, exactly what McGregor needed to restore some credibility. 40 seconds of vintage McGregor violence, complete with shoulder strikes and a head kick that reminded everyone why he had dominated the sport in the first place. For a brief moment, it looked like the King might actually be back, but appearances can be deceiving, especially when you're looking for reasons to believe something you want to be true. The Cerrone fight revealed as much about McGregor's limitations as his strengths. Against a non-wrestler past his prime, McGregor looked explosive and dangerous. The question remained whether he could still perform against elite competition that would test his evolved weaknesses. The answer came brutally and definitively against Dustin Poirier. Their trilogy would become a masterclass in how quickly a legend can fall when the skills that built the legend begin to erode. The first fight with Poirier had been a McGregor showcase years earlier. The rematch told a completely different story. McGregor's preparation looked different this time. The media obligations seemed to drain him rather than energize him. The trash talk felt forced, desperate rather than confident. Most telling of all, his movement in the octagon looked heavy, compromised by years of prioritizing business over the brutal conditioning that elite fighting demands. The injury excuse. Nothing exposes a fighter's mentality quite like how they handle adversity. When McGregor's leg snapped against Poirier in their trilogy fight, it provided him with something he hadn't possessed in years. A legitimate excuse for failure that didn't require examining deeper problems with his approach to the sport. The injury was real, gruesome, and undeniably serious. A broken tibia and fibula that would require extensive surgery and months of rehabilitation. But for McGregor, it became something more valuable than just a medical setback. It became a narrative shield, protecting him from the uncomfortable questions about his declining performance. From his hospital bed, McGregor began crafting a story that painted him as a warrior brought down by freak circumstance rather than systematic preparation failures. The leg break didn't happen in isolation. It was the result of sustained damage from Poirier's leg kicks, damage that a properly conditioned fighter might have absorbed differently. McGregor's defensive reactions looked slow, his movement compromised even before the dramatic finish. The months of recovery that followed became a masterclass in self-deception. Instead of using the forced break from competition to honestly assess what had gone wrong with his preparation, McGregor doubled down on the narrative that bad luck, not bad choices, had derailed his comeback. Social media became his platform for maintaining relevance while avoiding the hard work of genuine rehabilitation. Photos from luxury vacations replaced training footage. Business announcements overshadowed fight preparation updates. The pattern that had contributed to his decline was repeating itself, disguised as recovery. The empire crumbles. Success in combat sports is measured in moments of truth that can't be bought, negotiated, or marketed away. For all his business acumen and promotional genius, McGregor had forgotten the fundamental reality that everything else was built upon: his ability to win fights against elite competition. The whiskey business that had consumed so much of his attention was facing its own challenges. Market competition from other celebrity spirits, questions about actual sales figures versus marketing hype, and the simple reality that business success requires the same sustained focus that fighting had once demanded from him. Legal troubles began mounting like punches from an opponent who wouldn't stop pressing forward. Bar incidents, assault allegations, and civil lawsuits created a steady drumbeat of negative publicity that even McGregor's masterful media manipulation couldn't completely overcome. But the most damaging development was something more subtle and more permanent. The aura of invincibility that had made McGregor special was gone, replaced by the reality of a fighter whose best days were clearly behind him. Young contenders no longer saw him as a mountain to climb. They saw him as a name to build their own careers upon. The transformation was complete, but not in the way McGregor had envisioned years earlier. He had successfully transitioned from fighter to businessman, but in doing so, he had lost the thing that made any of his businesses valuable in the first place: his credibility as the most dangerous man on the planet. The point of no return. When a fighter crosses certain lines, there's no walking back. The damage isn't just to reputation or bank accounts, it's to the soul of what made them special in the first place. McGregor's descent wasn't happening in private training sessions or quiet business meetings anymore. It was playing out in public, messily and violently for the entire world to witness. The incidents started piling up like body shots in a brutal fight. A punch thrown at an elderly man in a Dublin pub over a rejected whiskey offer. The man didn't even flinch, didn't react, just absorbed the blow like it meant nothing. That moment, captured on security footage, became a metaphor for everything McGregor had become. A man throwing desperate punches at people who no longer saw him as a threat. But it wasn't just random bar altercations. The pattern revealed something darker, more systematic. Sexual assault allegations began surfacing, each one chipping away at whatever remained of his public image. Legal settlements, court appearances, and media storms became as much a part of his routine as training camps had once been. The most telling aspect wasn't the incidents themselves, it was how McGregor responded to them. Gone was the calculated confidence that had once made his trash talk feel like psychological warfare. Replaced by desperate deflection, victim blaming, and the kind of erratic behavior that screams of a man who knows he's lost control but refuses to admit it. His inner circle, once filled with genuine advisors and training partners, had transformed into damage control specialists and enablers. The people around him were no longer asking how to make him a better fighter. They were asking how to keep him out of prison. The transformation was complete and irreversible. The man who had once commanded respect through skill and charisma was now generating attention through scandal and controversy. It was still attention, still headlines, but it was the kind that destroys rather than builds. The kind that makes people turn away rather than lean in. The final bell. Some stories end with redemption, others end with recognition that certain bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. McGregor's attempt to return to fighting after his injury layoff wasn't just about proving he could still compete, it was about proving he still mattered in a sport that had moved on without him. The landscape had changed dramatically during his absence. New stars had emerged, new storylines had captured public attention, and the mystique that had once made him irreplaceable had faded like an old photograph left in direct sunlight. His attempted comeback fights revealed the harsh mathematics of athletic decline. Reflexes that had once been lightning quick now lagged behind his intentions. Movement that had once been fluid and unpredictable now looked mechanical and predictable. Most damaging of all, the killer instinct that had separated him from ordinary fighters seemed dulled by years of distractions and defeats. But the cruelest revelation wasn't physical, it was mental. The psychological warfare that had once been McGregor's secret weapon now felt desperate and hollow. Opponents weren't rattled by his trash talk. They were motivated by it. The fear he had once instilled was replaced by pity. And pity is the one emotion no fighter can survive. The numbers told the story more brutally than any highlight reel. Pay-per-view buys declining with each appearance. Betting odds shifting against him even in favorable matchups. Media coverage focusing more on his legal troubles than his fighting prowess. The empire he had built on the foundation of being the most dangerous man alive was crumbling because that foundation no longer existed. What made it particularly tragic was that glimpses of the old McGregor still flickered occasionally. Moments in fights where his timing looked perfect, where his movement resembled poetry, where his left hand still carried the power to change everything instantly. But these moments became clouds on a stormy night. The final nail, increasingly rare, like stars visible through heavy, wasn't a dramatic knockout or submission. It was something more subtle and more permanent. The realization, shared by fans and fighters alike, that Conor McGregor the phenomenon was gone forever, glories while the sport moved forward without him. What remained was just another aging fighter clinging to past bell had rung. The fight was over, and unlike his glory days, there would be no controversial decision to debate or immediate rematch to anticipate. This time, the verdict was unanimous and final. The king was dead, and he had killed himself through 1,000 small compromises that added up to one massive collapse. The downward spiral. When legends fall, they don't just lose fights, they lose themselves. And by 2023, Conor McGregor wasn't just losing in the octagon. He was losing control of everything that had once made him unstoppable. The carefully constructed image of the sharp-suited assassin was cracking, revealing something far more troubling underneath. The incidents weren't isolated anymore. They were forming a pattern that even his most loyal supporters couldn't ignore. Dublin became a minefield of potential confrontations, each night out carrying the risk of another viral video, another lawsuit, another headline that had nothing to do with fighting and everything to do with a man began spiraling out of control. The sexual assault allegations weren't just legal problems. They were character assassinations that cut deeper than any punch he'd ever absorbed. Civil courts in Dublin and beyond became battlegrounds where McGregor's reputation was being systematically dismantled, one testimony at a time. The man who had once commanded respect through skill was now buying silence through settlements. But perhaps most damaging was how he responded to these crises. His legal team was working overtime, not to negotiate fight contracts, but to manage an endless stream of civil suits and criminal investigations. The same energy that had once been focused on breaking down opponents was now being used to break down accusers. It was a different kind of fight, but one where McGregor's usual weapons were useless. The transformation was complete and devastating. The man who had once been celebrated as Ireland's golden boy was now seen as an embarrassment to the country he claimed to represent. Pubs that had once proudly displayed his photos were quietly taking them down. Sponsors who had once fought for his endorsement were distancing themselves from the toxic brand he had become. The business empire's collapse. Building a business empire requires the same discipline that creates fighting champions. But McGregor had forgotten this fundamental truth, and his commercial ventures began reflecting the same lack of focus that had destroyed his fighting career. What had once looked like smart diversification now resembled a desperate scramble to maintain relevance. Proper Nombre 12 whiskey, his flagship business venture, was facing challenges that went far beyond normal market competition. Sales figures that had once been proudly announced were now kept private. Distribution deals that had seemed revolutionary were being quietly restructured. The brand that had launched with such fanfare was struggling to maintain shelf space in a crowded marketplace. The problem wasn't just the product, it was the man behind it. McGregor's legal troubles and public controversies were becoming liability issues for retailers and distributors. Bars that had once featured his whiskey prominently were removing it from prime locations. Corporate partners were inserting morality clauses into contracts, protecting themselves from association with his increasingly toxic brand. His other ventures followed similar patterns of initial excitement, followed by quiet disappointment. Fashion lines that generated headlines but struggled with actual sales. Fitness programs that promised transformation but delivered little substance. Mobile apps that launched with celebrity fanfare but disappeared into obscurity. The fundamental issue was one that McGregor had never learned to address. Success in business requires sustained attention, continuous innovation, and long-term thinking. But his approach remained stuck in the instant gratification mindset that had worked in fighting but failed spectacularly in commerce. Investment opportunities that had once seemed endless were drying up. Venture capitalists who had once courted his involvement were now screening his calls. The golden touch that had once turned everything he touched into profit had become a curse that contaminated every deal he approached. The last stand. Desperation makes fighters dangerous in unpredictable ways, not because they become more skilled, but because they become more willing to cross lines that rational competitors avoid. McGregor's final attempts to reclaim relevance weren't just about winning fights anymore. They were about proving that he still mattered in a world that had moved on without him. His callouts became increasingly desperate and disconnected from reality, challenging fighters who had no interest in giving him the platform he needed, demanding title shots he hadn't earned, making promises about performances he couldn't deliver. The confidence that had once been magnetic was now repelling the very people he needed to restore his career. Training camps, when they happened at all, looked more like publicity stunts than serious preparation. Social media posts showing luxury workouts in exotic locations replaced the gritty footage of obsessive preparation that had once defined him. The work ethic that had carried him to the top was being replaced by the illusion of work ethic. His team, what remained of it, was walking on eggshells. Coaches who tried to deliver hard truths about his declining abilities were replaced by yes men who told him what he wanted to hear. The most telling sign wasn't what was happening in his training camps. It was what wasn't happening. The obsessive film study, the technical refinement, the mental preparation that separates champions from pretenders. McGregor was going through the motions of being a professional fighter while avoiding the actual work that professional fighting requires. When opportunities for real fights finally materialized, they revealed the harsh truth that everyone had suspected, but nobody wanted to say out loud. The McGregor who had once seemed invincible was gone forever, replaced by an impersonator who looked the same but fought like a shadow of his former self. The reckoning. Every empire has its moment of reckoning, when the gap between image and reality becomes too wide to bridge with charisma alone. For McGregor, that moment came not in a single dramatic collapse, but in the slow recognition that everything he had built was constructed on a foundation that no longer existed. The court cases weren't just legal proceedings anymore, they were public autopsies of his character, dissecting the man behind the myth with clinical precision. Testimony revealed patterns of behavior that painted a picture far removed from the disciplined warrior he had once claimed to be. The jury verdicts weren't just financial judgments, they were moral condemnations that stripped away the last remnants of his heroic image. From welfare checks in Dublin to the pinnacle of combat sports, Conor McGregor rewrote the rules of what a fighter could become. But in chasing everything else, he lost the one thing that made it all possible. His story isn't just about the fall of a champion, it's about the price of forgetting what made you great in the first place. And sometimes that price is everything.